You know, have you ever gotten to one of those days where after years of working jobs as a teenager, you start accumulating quite a bit of money? Nothing rich or anything like that, but for your age, quite a bit. But money in amounts that can get you basically any piece of technology there on the market for everyday use. Not to mention those pieces of technology at their most powerful. Then once you get to that point, any old pieces of technology you might have had before you made that amount of money that you had to use in the meantime, you kind of just toss it away in your basement, or in your closet or whatever. And you basically forget about them for a few years, letting them collect dust. Well, in this case, after those few years pass by of technology, old technology just sitting collecting dust, you finally also have the money to help out others who might not have such resources like you do, like a buddy in school or work. And then, that thing you thought was an old piece of junk can now be revived and upgraded into something of greatness and given to that person who's not as fortunate. Meet the Dell Optiplex 745 small form factor. Released in 2007 and launched to the public priced at $599 at the time of release, this PC for its time was a pretty good deal. It was smaller compared to its counterparts, hence why this version of it is called small form factor, and also paired with specs that at the time were pretty high performance, especially for what is considered even at the time to be a basic PC, not meant for anything like gaming on the highest settings with great frame rates. Before I could even look at the specs, I got a black screen with a blinking cursor on my screen. Not even a loading screen or a BIOS, which was odd. Nice. Pressing anything on the keyboard didn't work at all, and I even tried resetting the CMOS battery, and that didn't work either. Then I saw the PC was generating an error code of 1 and 3, and before I even knew what these numbers meant, I thought this was normal. But to my surprise, seeing as I haven't used this PC in almost 4 or 5 years, there was actually a RAM issue. So I tried reseating the RAM sticks a bunch of times and that didn't work. So at that point I just took one RAM stick out and that solved it. 4 sticks of 512 megabytes of RAM for 2 gigabytes of RAM total. With one taken out, we only had 1.5 gigabytes of RAM. Let that sink in. How the heck? I didn't even know that was possible. This is again very weird because after seeing how slow the PC is with only 1.5 gigabytes of RAM, I actually put the stick back in to see if I could get 2 gigabytes back on here, and it actually worked. Even though this is the same stick that was causing the computer not to work before, which was odd. Even after trying out all those different sticks in different slots to finally get this to work, and it didn't at first, but now it did. Confusing stuff, even for me, man. This PC specs, according to what it says upon looking at the PC info with the built-in software, states that it has 2 gigabytes of DDR2 RAM, an Intel Core 2 Duo E4300 running at 1.80 gigahertz, and an 80 gigabyte hard drive from Seagate. As it stands, being as old as this thing is out of the box, it has no USB 3.0 ports, only 2.0. No HDMI cable, and instead having the DVI port for the DVI cable, standing for Digital Visual Interface. And even though built-in Wi-Fi was still a relatively new concept at the time for desktop PCs, it was still being pushed out nonetheless. So you'd think, at least for 2007, a 2007 PC made by an expensive, well-known company like Dell, totally known for making high-quality PCs, would implement this. Well, with this PC, Dell's kinda like, screw you, bro. Get an adapter, or just use a wired connection, because there's no sign of built-in Wi-Fi here, and from my understanding, no Bluetooth either. Interestingly enough, however, this PC was also packaged with Windows XP. Not anymore, however, which is the reason I stopped using it all those years ago. However, on the side, this PC also had a version of Ubuntu running on it, and at the time of scripting this, I still have no idea what version of Ubuntu this PC ran, but I'll show what it says in the operating system tab if that does anything for you. Not that it matters too much though, since we'll be destroying it for a better OS anyways. But if you do want some info about this version of Ubuntu without getting into lots of unnecessary details, it's
fucking bullshit!
Yeah, it is very slow and very hard to navigate. Like, why the heck is the taskbar basically non-existent? The Windows key on the keyboard does nothing to mitigate this either, though I guess it shouldn't be too much of a surprise. It is Linux. And you have to download and or run most of your programs through CMD, command prompt, which on paper for really experienced Linux users sounds just fine, until you realize the fact that the lack of a taskbar also makes locating such apps a huge chore. And the fact that most apps in general in this version of Linux just either won't run with lots of issues, or can run yet require lots of troubleshooting to run in the first place, that by the time you finally get it working, you realize in that time you either could have just installed a better version of Linux, or better yet, just install a version of Windows and run that same program with little to no issues. With that in mind, the first step before even considering anything else, logically, would be to just get Windows installed. I figured I might actually start out with Windows 7 to start, seeing as this PC might not run 10 well given its age and specs on here. So I went on my phone and downloaded the Windows 7 ISO for free, on a totally official website for it, since, I mean, it's not like my worse than 2.4G Wi-Fi was going to download it faster than a 5G data plan. Then I ran Balena Etcher on my PC that I installed some years back, which is used to flash ISO files onto a USB to make it a bootable USB drive. This wasn't working at all, and that's when I realized that this is mainly used for Linux ISO files, not Windows. Darn. So then I installed Rufus instead, which creates bootable USB drives of your respective operating system but works for Windows. This also gave me issues as well, seeing as it would constantly tell me that other programs were using the drive, asking me if I wanted to continue. This would also happen after it completed the flashing process, and sometimes it would even give me an error saying that it doesn't have the permissions to flash to that drive, even though I'm fairly certain I was running Rufus as an admin, not to mention the fact that it takes around half an hour for it to flash. That could be somewhat off, but the point is it takes a long time to flash, only to get hit with an error, and then you gotta start all over again, and then you gotta do this multiple friggin' times. I did, however, finally get it to flash to the drive. Yay. So I plug it into our subject here, and we get this error message. Yeah. So apparently after all that, I didn't even take into account that this tech is so ancient that instead of having UEFI as the motherboard firmware, we have the good old BIOS firmware. And I flashed this USB with UEFI compatibility, not the former. So I had to run back onto the main computer and flash it with BIOS compatibility. Then I tried it again, and we finally have the Windows 7 installation up and running on this thing. The usual things it just asks for are, do you agree to these terms, and so on and so forth. And then it asked me what drive I wanted to install Windows on, which, obviously, the main drive for our purposes is the Linux one, so buy unknown version of Ubuntu, you will not be missed. And then we wait and wait for possibly hours. I came back and Windows 7 was successfully installed. Some things I noticed right off the bat, for one, was the fact that this OS wasn't supported anymore, which is to be expected, so security on this thing is severely lacking. Microsoft Edge isn't on here like with newer versions of Windows. Instead, the base browser you get is good old Internet Explorer, which runs probably just as you'd expect for an unsupported browser. There's also the fact that the desktop background goes black after every 30 minutes due to this not being an activated version of Windows 7 since I got it for free. Despite all that though, it is Windows at the end of the day. Unlike that lackluster Ubuntu OS, we actually have a taskbar, an easy-to-navigate file system, and full compatibility with most, if not all, applications and software we come across, with Windows made in mind. The first thing I needed to do before anything else was to get Google Chrome installed on here, since Internet Explorer would never cover the things I needed to do. First though, we need to get out the trusty Netgear USB, a device that allows for Wi-Fi connection. I went onto my main PC, grabbed the newest drivers I could find, and installed the necessary components to get it running. After that, I realized there's issues with the Wi-Fi as well. It might not be stated on the device's support page, but it doesn't support 5G networks. So I ran 2.4G for my phone hotspot instead, which for some reason runs just as well, if not just slightly slower than the 5G option. Now the next thing to do was get Chrome installed. Success! However, being that Chrome ended support for unsupported operating systems a while ago, we could run Chrome, just not fully up to date. Something I noticed that hindered the progression of installing things was the fact that the time was set to 2007. The date this PC presumably was made, which silly me didn't know till later that resetting the CMOS battery could do this. Though the PC did keep saying that the voltage was low, so meh, it would have happened anyway, I guess. However, this meant I had to reset the time almost every time I booted up this PC, which was really annoying. With Chrome installed, the first logical thing to see is if we can run some Steam games on this thing. Before I installed Steam via browser, I made Windows 7 keep all the files of whatever I had installed on previous Windows OSs in the past, which means I had an old copy of Steam in my files. So I opened it up hoping to try some games and was met with two unbreakable roadblocks. One, all the games that were installed in the past needed updates to run. And two, Steam just wouldn't download anything when I tried updating these games. I tried running Steam as an admin, reduced compatibility, nothing worked. So I stopped trying to run Steam like this, and simply went to Chrome to get the latest version. I ran the installer, it seemed to get the files Steam needs to run, but then, yeah. Seeing as Steam also ended support for unsupported Windows OSs a few years ago, Windows 7 just wasn't gonna run this. But that didn't stop me from trying. I tried running it as an admin, with a different compatibility layer, and even tried a program called VxKex, a program meant to make unsupported programs run on unsupported operating systems. And that didn't work either. So basically, Windows 7 was a lost cause, and that was all for nothing. In defeat, I went to my main PC and flashed the Windows 10 OS onto my drive from Microsoft's official site, ran the installer on our subject, and got it running, and I asked to keep whatever little things we might have had from Windows 7 in the process. Right away, there's a couple things that are very noticeable. The first being that Windows 10 being so modern for a system like this runs like a snail, and the fact that the integrated graphics would have ran otherwise aren't even supported by 10. So we're running off the Microsoft Basic Display adapter from here on out. I actually tried looking up what integrated graphics I even had, with HW Info and other softwares that showed you every spec your PC has. Even tried installing an Intel Auto Detect software that would auto-detect what I had. That didn't even work, since it likely knew it just wasn't even supported anymore. We also have the very nice Activate Windows sign on the bottom right corner. Always nice, pirating Windows, you know. I was actually able to install Steam this time. That's an absolute win. However, even with games actually being able to launch, with just how slow this PC was, I knew running games like this was just never happening. Not even Half-Life 2 would respect a PC like this on this OS. Logically speaking then, just upgrade the thing. So I thought. Until I realized there's a whole bunch of other things I have to figure out in research with this, considering the age of this computer. I wanted to upgrade the GPU, the graphics card, first things first. However, I needed to see if the motherboard even had a PCIe x16 express slot, which, judging by the model of the motherboard, after asking AI about it, it said no, it doesn't have that. It doesn't have it, meaning I couldn't upgrade the GPU, or so I thought. It just happened that after so many years of not needing to deal with PC hardware in this manner, I forgot what this slot even looks like to begin with, and it was actually on this PC the whole time. Wow. Same thing with the BIOS. I thought the BIOS was too old for the GPU, because apparently that's a requirement for a GPU, but it wasn't. I didn't find that out though until I actually put a GPU in it. My job that I was working at the time actually let me use one of their GPUs from one of their PCs they had in it, and they let me put it in this one so I could test it, so I gotta thank them for that. However, we're in luck. This PC not only had a 275 watt power supply, but there's plenty of GPUs we can go with, considering the PC as it barely takes up 100 watts of power due to the low power components. As a side note, while researching what to get for the PC for nearly 6 years, I always thought the recommended PSU wattage specified on the GPU manufacturer's website always meant you needed to have a PSU with that amount of power, otherwise things wouldn't work or would always get messy or sometimes be in flames. However, only until now, thanks to Microsoft Copilot, I figured out that's simply just taking into account all the other components of the computer, meaning a GPU that recommends 350 or even 400, even a 400 watt PSU takes up likely only 65 watts or just slightly more watts of power, not what it recommends, which is something I wish I knew a long time ago. The only downside is that due to potential bottleneck constraints with the current CPU of this thing, we can't go super crazy with the graphics card regardless of how much power we have with the power supply. It's a bummer, yet despite that, I decided to get the AMD Radeon RX 550 GPU on Amazon. This is a great budget card for lower end systems at only around $100 and takes up only 50 watts of power max, and coming in with 4 gigabytes of VRAM. Darn, I wish my RX 560 had that much VRAM on my main PC. It only has 2. Installing a GPU normally is really easy. You just put it in its slot, plug the HDMI cable in, download and install the drivers required for it, and you're all set. But of course, not in our case. First of all, the downloader for this thing gets stuck on 100% for 5 minutes or more every time. Then I launch the installer, tell it to do a full install, then restart the PC to complete the process. Normally, once you do this, your screen resolution should be bigger. You'll have more settings to choose from in Windows settings and with AMD Radeon settings now available, but not here. So I go into Device Manager to see what's up, and every time I do, I either see my GPU in there with a yellow exclamation mark next to it, or I just see the Microsoft Basic Display adapter. Neither are any good for our purposes. So then for hours, I'm just in a cycle of going online, re-downloading drivers, trying different versions of the drivers, and was about to resort to a hardware auto-detect technique, until I saw this video. Now, I have no idea if the card I bought was used or new, but basically, I knew it was most likely used after seeing this. So apparently this card had mining firmware on it, I guess, which isn't compatible with everyday computer use. Only mining like Bitcoin or NFTs or something of that realm. Thanks to the gentleman in this video, I managed to download a piece of software he linked, which, when you run it, basically tells your system how to interact with the firmware on your card. What's worse is you have to do this every time you update your card's drivers. After that fiasco though, I did get the GPU working. What a way to waste some hours. Before we get into the CPU and RAM upgrades, I wanted to test a few games with this newly installed GPU with the current RAM and CPU. So, in no particular order, the first game I ran was Half-Life Source. Don't question it, it was the only Half-Life game I had on my external drive. Running at 1440p with maxed out settings, I was actually a little bit disappointed. Any FPS Half-Life game should run on a friggin' toaster, to be honest. But here I was met with frames that were 60, 80, and sometimes above, which was good. But the bad part was the fact that the stuttering basically made those frames seem non-existent. Even when lowering settings, the stuttering was still there. Overall, however, pretty playable. Then I tested Ultra Kill. Definitely a game that's a lot newer than Half-Life, yet it has very retro, easy to run graphics, so I figured it shouldn't be too bad. Not exactly a whole lot of settings to work with here, with the kinds of graphics we're exactly working with here. Yet, I did try to turn as many noteworthy things up as I could at 1440p, and more stuttering. Not as bad as Half-Life Source, yet still there nonetheless. The part where you pick up your first weapon, being the pistol, froze my screen for around 10 seconds before unfreezing. The first combat encounter was as stuttery as you could imagine, so after it was over I decided, yeah, I gotta lower some settings now, which I did. Oh yeah, and even worse, whenever there was stuttering, the game's sound was super delayed. Then I even tried the downscaling option, which helped, barely. What in the actual heck is this setting, bro? Who made this? Overall, poor performance. Then I tried a classic, Metal Gear Rising: Revengeance, which was designed to literally run on the Xbox 360 and PS3 at 60 FPS. So I thought this might be doable. It's worse than anything I ran previously. Lowest settings possible gets you this. Yeah, I don't need to go on any further with this one. Next game. This time I tried DMC Devil May Cry. Yeah, the stupid Devil May Cry reboot that was really controversial and mostly forgotten about. Though I didn't have any other DMC games on this external drive, so this is the only one I can play test here. The results? Well, for a game that came out around the same time as Metal Gear Rising, it's surprisingly playable. When running at the best possible settings, it seems mostly to run between 10 and 20 FPS. Sometimes 30 when you get lucky. This is during combat. However, I noticed even the cutscenes have an FPS issue as well, since they're not pre-rendered like a lot of the games these days. Overall, not bad. So what I got from this as a whole with our current setup, aside from the graphics card being the only new addition thus far, this PC can run games, yes, but it's a pain to do so. Since the CPU and RAM not only aren't at their fullest potential, but they're also heavily dragging the GPU down due to how old they are. Games at best so far seem to only be playable if you turn down a lot of crap, even on some games that some would consider to have retro graphics. So let's upgrade the CPU and RAM, shall we? For the CPU, I asked AI what CPUs the motherboard supports. The one it told me, which I thought was the most powerful, was the Intel Core 2 Duo E6600, which I'll leave a spec comparison here for you to compare this with our current CPU. I decided to also upgrade the RAM from 2GB to 8GB. However, when the RAM finally came in, I totally forgot to factor in the fact that this motherboard doesn't just support any RAM configuration. So my single 4GB stick was basically useless. Yet, as each slot can only hold up to 2GB of RAM at most. For some reason as well, my single 1GB stick of RAM didn't work either. However, I compromised by grabbing a 1GB stick from my old PC that my grandmother let me keep that's used. And I use that instead. While not ideal, the RAM is now sitting at 4GB, so the RAM is basically doubled now. With all that checked out, let's retest some of those games that I tested before, as well as some new ones. Starting with Halo the Master Chief Collection. Now, I'd love to sit here and go on about how each game in the collection ran on this hardware. However, this PC just won't let me do that. The only game that actually ran for me was Halo Combat Evolved, and I get it. Halo MCC, even on modern hardware like my main PC, is still incredibly buggy, and it crashes a lot when it really shouldn't. But here, AMD Radeon software didn't even want to record Halo, as whenever you try either by starting to record in-game or in the menus trying to load up the game would either freeze and crash or just not record at all. So I recorded with my phone instead. Needless to say, on the classic graphics, the FPS was a solid 60. Nice. On remastered, which I don't have footage for, it ran at 30. 60 was achievable, however, when lowering settings, so improvements are definitely there. Then I retested Half-Life Source, and things were a lot better, even on maxed out settings. 60 FPS smooth, 99% of the time, even when firing lots of weapons and trying my hardest to stress the hardware out. Metal Gear Rising, as usual, doesn't even feel playable at all. Around the same FPS as last time, so not much to say here. Returning to DMC Devil May Cry, improvements were also noticed. FPS is doubled here and sometimes even higher. I tried it at 1440p and 768p, both of which seem to run about the same FPS. Now FPS reaches 30 to 40, even in combat scenarios, and sometimes even higher when not in combat or crazy scenarios. Returning to Ultra Kill, similar issues were present. The part where you get your first weapon still froze for 10 seconds when picking it up. This is all at 1440p, and FPS was hanging around 40 to 60. An improvement, yet could be a lot better. Another game I tested out that I didn't before on this PC was Gary's Mod. I loaded up the game on max settings, the maximum settings I could get it up to. I loaded it up on one of the base maps. Yes, forgive me, it's been that long since I touched Gmod. The game didn't run too bad. Yeah, I got 40 and 30 FPS sometimes, but most of the time it seemed to reach 60 or higher at 1440p. Very nice to see. Source engine games are always very well optimized to the point where you can run them on a toaster, so I'd say this is a win. Finally, another game I ran on this hardware was Serious Sam, specifically the HD remaster. Now, I ran this game with the base settings it gave me at 1440p, and other than a few stutters here and there, the game ran exceptionally well, reaching frame rates even above 60. So overall, as it is currently, you can run a lot of low to mid-end games, and you can reach above 60 FPS sometimes if you lower lots of things, which is a huge win. After all this, I gave my friend his gift. How's it going, buddy?
How you doing, Val?
So, you're waiting on the side. We're around the front of the house.
It's alright.
All right, there you go.
Now,
Good
the
luck
power
with it.
cord's all there. I hope you have a good time with it.
Too. What's this?
That's the Wi-Fi USB.
Oh, okay.
There is a little bit of dust in it if you want to clean it up. And this thing here, let me show you. So,
Pick up the cord so it doesn't
yeah, also do that. So,
Here, hold this.
Yeah, so you're just gonna put it somewhere?
I'm gonna put it up in my room.
Oh, I see. So if you ever wanted to open it up, there's like a slider right here. You just slide it and then this pops open.
Alright.
What? Oh, you thought that was the end, huh? Well, not so fast. Remember, I previously stated how the RAM could have been upgraded to 8 gigabytes. I just thought I bought 8 gigabytes of RAM with the wrong speeds and compatibility for this PC. And I thought I bought the most powerful CPU. Emphasis on the word thought. Because the Core 2 Duo E6600 was not actually the most powerful CPU supported by this. I asked AI what CPUs this machine supported. I didn't ask it, however, what the most powerful CPU it was that it supported. You gotta be real specific with AI, huh? And the hard drive is just pathetic, something I should have upgraded from the start. So, I got some new parts and to put in that arrived from Amazon. I got 8 gigabytes of RAM, 4 sticks of 2 to be exact, running at 667 megahertz per stick, which was the max speed supported by the motherboard for such an amount of RAM. Then I got the Intel Core 2 Quad Q6700, then followed by a 1TB SATA hard drive by Seagate. All components used in this video will be linked, by the way, if you want to check them out for yourself. I got the PC back from my friend 2 months after I gave it to him, and less than a week after the parts arrived. So then I got to work. All the components successfully worked, which was already evident by how fast the initial boot up time took, and loading times for basic Windows applications, and likely was also due to me installing Windows on the new hard drive, replacing the old one. Without wasting much more of your time, let's benchmark the games once again. Hopefully though you can ignore the fact that the benchmark videos are only recorded in 30 FPS rather than 60, even though the Radeon settings are basically the same. I don't know why it did that. DMC Devil May Cry made me very happy at 1440p. FPS seemed to almost never drop below 30, and on average, FPS dwell from 45 to 60, even in intense combat scenarios. Half-Life Source Deathmatch, 1440p max settings, saw FPS anywhere from 60 to around 200 FPS. And I even tried testing this out in a multiplayer match I somehow managed to find in a multiplayer port of a game most people already hate. Explosions, gunfire, energy weapons struggled to make a dent in the performance of this. Well done. Metal Gear Rising, though, is still disappointing. It's just a lost cause at this point. No matter what resolution you set it to, the game only got a very small increase in FPS, anywhere from 12 to 15, and still doesn't feel playable. Gmod runs well, however. At max settings, 1440p runs nearly flawlessly, even when spawning in NPCs and making them fight to the death. Still makes me wonder how Half-Life 2 would run on here. Serious Sam, like Half-Life Source, ran exceptionally well on the settings it gave me at 1440p. The settings it gives you are characterized by either Customize, Low, Medium, High, and Ultra. It gave me Low for CPU speed, GPU speed, and Ultra for GPU memory. The lowest I got here was probably 70, on average 100, and at max 130. However, then I decided to up the settings a bit. I changed the GPU speed to Ultra as well as the GPU memory. The performance, granted I didn't know exactly what settings were set to what at Ultra, I didn't know the specifics, it was still playable. Max FPS was 40, average 30, lowest of 20. Returning to Ultra Kill at 1440p, when picking up the first weapon, it only took 2 to 3 seconds to register and unfreeze this time instead of 10 or more. Thank God. Max FPS, even though I think I might have forgot to uncap the frame rate, was 61, average was 57, and lowest was 40 when killing enemies and splattering them up close. Even during the first boss fight, FPS was relatively unchanged. The only difference was the lowest FPS, which was 30 after killing him up close like I do. Finally, we have a game that, as I mentioned previously, I couldn't even get to record, nor could I even launch all the games within it. Halo the Master Chief Collection. Before I start though, I want to say there was still an issue. As soon as I start recording with AMD software in-game, the game's FPS just cuts in half or less for some reason. And when I stop recording, everything's back to normal again. So I'm just gonna say, what you're seeing on your screen is not a fully accurate representation about how the game normally runs. Just take the numbers you see from the Steam FPS counter and double it if you will, at the top left-hand corner of the screen. At 1440p, Halo CE, even on the remastered graphics, when you double the FPS or more, gets a solid 60, and 25 at the lowest. A massive improvement from when 30 was just the average on remastered. This is when not doing much, and when engaged in combat. Next is Halo Reach. When not recording this game, the FPS did vary, but 60 FPS was indeed achievable, even at 1440p. When lowering the resolutions to things like 1080, 768, and even 720p, 60 FPS was there almost all the time. 1440p at max gives you 60, average 50, lowest 20. Halo 2 on classic graphics at 1440p would run at 60 flawlessly like Halo CE would on classic graphics when not recording. And Anniversary graphics would run anywhere between 30 and 50. I'd say 50 max. Average 30, lowest 15. Halo 3, mostly everyone's favorite Halo, ran at 60 at max and average, with the lowest being 30. Though at the same time, it's not the most surprising considering when factoring in remastered graphics for Halo 2 and CE. 3 is technically the oldest in the collection graphically speaking. Good to see an Xbox 360 classic running this well though. Halo 4, interestingly enough, ran better, at least in certain areas for the most part, than classic Halo CE and 2, getting above 30 sometimes. For the second newest game in the collection, graphically speaking, it runs very well. You can easily get 60 here, not recording, maybe even higher when lowering the resolution. And there you have it. When factoring the upgrades, and not the price of the PC originally bought, you have the ultimate $160 Dell Optiplex 745, brought back to life with some budget-friendly upgrades. I then also made sure to give it back to the man himself, and he texted me saying he loves it, and it runs amazing. I'm very glad I could help you out, bro. And to close this video off, I'm going to answer a question some of you might have after all this. Should you grab an old PC from your basement and upgrade it using some budget parts, or just save up to get a slightly more expensive yet likely 2 to 3 times better gaming PC, or parts to make a modern 2 to 3 times better gaming PC? And to that I'd say, just get a gaming PC, bro. It's definitely more worth your money, and you don't have to go through all this old compatibility crap I had to go through here. Hope you enjoyed. Thanks for watching.